Ethiopia is a landlocked country. Eritrea holds two ports on the Red Sea, Massawa and Assab. So today, I will try to answer a question that has become highly misunderstood, highly misrepresented, politicized, but it's a simple question. Can Ethiopia use Eritrean ports? I think the simple answer to that is yes. But if yes, how? And in order to answer that question, we actually have to cut through the noise, cut through the unrealistic claims coming from Ethiopia about Eritrea, sovereignty and so on, and actually focus on future generations. And in order to focus on future generations and whatever we propose on how the sports could be used, it has to be legal, it has to be safe for both countries, it has to be realistic, it has to be doable, and at the end of the day, it has to benefit both countries, Ethiopia and Eritrea. And if we look at this from the future generations of point of view, we actually have to think for the long term and start working on some trust building strategies today. So today I will be bringing a couple of ideas on how we can do that. It's not a question about history. It's not a question about emotion. It's not a question even about politics or who deserves what. It is actually about international law, logistics, economics, long term stability and peace for the region and for future generations. What do I mean by that? I will explain. Thank you for tuning in and welcome to the program. So let's start with the real question again, which is, can Ethiopia use Eritrean ports? And as I said earlier, the simple answer to that is yes. Based on what? Based on what Eritrea has been saying, not only in recent past, not only in the last decade or two, it's actually from Eritrea's independence, starting from that. And it has created on several occasions very favorable terms for Ethiopia to use it, but war and politics got in the way, and to this day, we are where we are. But the answer to that remains that Ethiopia definitely can use Eritrean ports. But the key word to that is use. The key to that is uh, just use it legally, like all nations do, like all landlocked countries do. Then, if they use it the same way what Ethiopia has been using Djibouti ports for, or Somali ports for, or ports in Kenya. So the keyword is as simple as that: use. Okay, with that in mind, let's go to the how. And the how requires that it has to be done legally, it has to be done safely, and it has to be realistic. Now, especially the realistically part, I invite you to watch this video all the way through so you can judge for yourself if what I'm proposing here could be realistic. And more importantly, there will be many ideas, there will be many proposals on how it could be done. But at the end of the day, they have to be realistic enough, they have to be doable enough. And let's go into what I mean by legally and safely here as well. By legally, what I'm talking about is what I have been saying and what many others have been saying, what Eritrea has been saying for a long, long time. And it's not complicated. Of course, if you're not doing something legally, that means you're opting for something illegal. So illegal is not going to work. Illegal against the something that's against the international law, something that's done by force, and so on. So anyway, there could be many, many ways to gauge this, but it's as simple as you respect the UN Charter of Sovereignty. And the UN Charter is pretty simple and applies for all countries, and it's not about ports and access to the sea. It's about the principle of respecting each other's territorial integrity and so on. So that goes without saying. And it also goes respecting with the AU border principle in case of Africa, because the it's not that it is, if you have the UN chapter, the AU border principle is just an addition to that. But speaking of respecting each other's territory, respecting each other's sovereignty, if you are not respecting the UN charter and the AU charter, they are non-starters for the purpose of what we are talking about. Then, whatever port agreements are, there's not going to be any fancy something that is only going to be applied to Ethiopia and Eritrea. It will be the standard international port access agreements all countries all over the world uses. So, using the norms and practices of the civilized world, as simple as that. And another aspect to it is paying normal fees because um, the, that's how when, as I mentioned in the beginning, Ethiopia is a landlocked country, and Eritrea has ports that Ethiopia can access. And in the situation, the normal relationship, the peaceful relationship, is for Ethiopia to pay a normal fee, and for Eritrea to provide that that service if it chooses to, but while protecting its full sovereignty. So legally means as simple as that. Let's move on to the next topic of what we would what would be like a prerequisite. And the other one is whatever it is, whatever solution we propose, it has to keep with peace and safety in mind. So what do I mean by safety? Without triggering any more tension. We know the rhetoric of politics and how it could trigger tension. We saw that the last couple of years. In fact, as we speak today, we are on that. Abiy Ahmed's campaign um, of whatever he chose to do for the last couple of years is actually triggering a lot of region, not only tension between Eritrea and Ethiopia, but creating more tensions for the region. So whatever new proposals we can come up with, it definitely should be able to solve that. And then, in order for something to be done safely, it has to protect Eritrea's peace, borders, and sovereignty. You can't create something that is for the long term, that is for prosperity and peace and future generations is in mind, by undermining Eritrea's rights, peace, its sovereignty, territorial integrity. We don't need to repeat it, but that's part of doing something safely. Another way of saying that is by not triggering another war. And then something to add to that is, uh, once again, if we go back to the rule-based system legally, uh, if there are conflicts and disagreements, there should be a way to prevent escalation. And if it is done within the auspices of the international norms and agreements, there are legal ways of resolving that. So part of that safety is a safety net that says we are doing this based on rules. Then the one that I mentioned earlier is, okay, how could this be done realistically? Okay, you be the judge by the end of this video, but what I will try to propose here is, first of all, because we are already in a low trust environment, to be realistic, it has to be done step by step. We can't be from where we are, given the history of the last 80 years, given the history of the last 30 years, given the history of the last 20 years, given the history of the last 2 years. Uh, in to move from here on, it has to be done step by step with a long term in mind. And then one way of gauging whether something is realistic or not is it has to be done using the existing logistics. You only start from where you are. So in this case, using the existing logistics of what you have at the ports, using the existing, starting from the existing roads and facilities that we have, and I will explain that a little better. Um, and for something to be realistic, it has to benefit both countries. Whatever arrangements are proposed, they have to be acceptable for both countries. Otherwise, or if it is a win-lose situation, no sane country, nobody's going to say, okay, I will put myself at a disadvantage so that you can benefit. So bottom line, it has to be a win-win situation for both countries. So to conclude that part, we can simply say whatever we do, as long as it protects Eritrea's sovereignty, it respects Eritrea's sovereignty, and then it gives access access for Ethiopia, I think it's solvable. In fact, from the Eritrean perspective, from what we've been hearing for years and years, it it definitely has these two criteria in mind. Eritrea's sovereignty is non-negotiable, and at the end of the day, it was inviting Ethiopia to access the sea, to access or to use its ports. So as simple as that, without complicating things. The reason I have the word trust in such big bold letters here is the one ingredient that's going to make this possible or not is trust. And in any relationship, even personal relationship, the foundation of any deal, the foundation of any two healthy relationship is trust. Once you lose that trust, nothing is possible. And then once you lose that trust, people who are uh, once people lose trust, they become afraid of what the other party is going to do, and then they take measures to defend themselves, and then they try to figure out if they can outsmart the other party, and then things go haywire. And that's basically been the history of our region. So, which means if trust is a major ingredient, and as I mentioned here earlier, we are in a trust deficit. We are in a low trust environment right now. And this will not go away immediately. But if one is bold enough to say, let's move forward, let's think of generations um, to come and see if we can create a win-win situation, not only for both countries, maybe for even for the entire region, it has to be based on building that trust, because at this time I can even say that the trust level is in probably an all-time low. Even though Ethiopia and Eritrea has been actually in war situations for decades, and it's we especially Eritreans, because all the war has been in Eritrea, we really have suffered. But on several occasions, the attempt has been made to move forward. But as we speak today, we are in a low trust situation. I'm calling it like a trust deficit, which means we really have to build that trust enough to even bring it back to zero, to normal, and then slowly build something that could be trustworthy. Now, in order to do this, on what I'm proposing here from here on is a strategy, but at the end of the day, it's a trust building strategy. It's a graduated from one phase to the next to the next, and as we move on to the from one phase to the next phase, the idea is to build that trust. So what do I mean by that? I'm going to break them down to three phases. We're going to call them phase one, phase two, and phase three. um, so I try to be, I really try to force myself to be very realistic. So for each phase, it's not something that will be rushed. It will not be something that will be done within a couple of months or a couple of years, for that matter. In order for this to be realistic, we actually have to give ourselves enough time to do the logistical, the actual on the ground things that needs to take place, and then we also need to give it enough time for trust to build over time. Okay, before we move forward to the three phases that I'm referring to, let's get a couple of things out of the way. In fact, they have something to do with mindset. And that mindset has to come from current Ethiopian leaders, Ethiopian elites, even future generations. And that is how to frame being landlocked. The bottom line is being landlocked is definitely logistically challenging, and all nations have all sorts of challenges, but it does not have to be an existential crisis. And so far, what we've been hearing from Ethiopia, especially Abiy Ahmed and his regime, and the way it's been presented from Ethiopian leaders so far, has been that it is an existential crisis, and if they don't get their way, that hell will break loose. But the reality, the fact of the matter is, it never is that. It's not for other countries, and there are solutions in this case. Ethiopia has many options, and Eritrean ports being among the uh, many of ports that Ethiopia can choose from. So it's definitely a challenge. It's not a crisis, because the minute one puts it as a crisis, they will be forcing everyone to agree with them and then agitating their own population to choose wrong approaches. So, with that in mind, is actually being landlocked. How are other countries actually dealing with this? Ethiopia is not the only one. And all of a sudden, this manufactured crisis that whether we've been hearing from Ethiopia for the last couple of years, a lot of nations actually have to deal with this for centuries, including a few examples that we have here. And it's not a matter of population, by the way, at the end of the day. The amount or the urgency of your port's usage is related to more to the economic activity, to the growth of GDP, to the growth of imports and exports, not necessarily to population. But at the end of the day, maybe population could be tied to GDP. But more importantly, Switzerland, for example, has, and as we see that on this list, it has a trillion GDP compared to Ethiopia's about 100 billion GDP. So Ethiopia has about 10% of Switzerland's economy. Uh, but they're both landlocked country. So if Switzerland can solve it using its ports in the neighborhood, neighboring countries' ports. If Austria can do it, if the Czech Republic can do it, if Hungary can do it, if a bunch of other African can do it, definitely Ethiopia can and is, as we speak, doing it, and it's been doing that for the last 3 decades. So this new manufactured existential crisis simply doesn't exist. And a lot of countries actually much more prosperous, much more influential countries than Ethiopia are able to do it. So again, we are still talking about the mindset or the way to frame that need coming from Ethiopia. That has to change if we are going to have any viable solution. Not only countries in Europe, also countries from everywhere, from Bolivia, which accesses ports in Chile, Paraguay, they access ports in Brazil and Argentina and so on, and Nepal and Mongolia and Niger, Laos, which accesses ports in, I believe, in Thailand and so on. This is not something that needs to be invented. This has been solved everywhere for decades. But what is the difference between what Ethiopia has been saying and doing for the last couple of years and these other nations that are landlocked who actually uh, find peaceful and legal ways of doing it? Is at the end of the day, they use agreements, not threats, not threats of invasion, not threats of our population is growing, our GDP is growing, so we're going to invade you, and we deserve this, and everything has to be revised, or the whole United Nations and African Union charters and norms have to be people have to create exceptions for Ethiopia. That is not how things work, and that will never work. The the one that has real hope of working is using agreements like all other normal nations do. Again, to reiterate, I'm going to just mention a few countries here because it's not only using about ports from just one country and being tied to it. It is actually multiple countries using multiple sources. Now, Uganda uses the ports in Kenya and Tanzania, as we know. I just mentioned Switzerland, which uses Holland and ports in Holland and the Netherlands and Belgium and Italy. Rwanda uses Kenya and Tanzania. Hungary uses ports in Germany and Holland, and so on and so forth. And now Ethiopia uses Kenya. Ethiopia uses probably Somalia or Somaliland and Djibouti. And we understand the question is the real question for Ethiopia is okay, 95% of its port usage has been through Djibouti by choice, by the way, because all it had to do was solve the problem or find a solution, or it tried to handle the Eritrea situation wrongly, and here we are. So obviously, Ethiopia needs some kind of diversification, plan B problem, capacity problem, and so on. But at the end of the day, its situation and the solutions that needs to be proposed is not any different from what other nations would do. Again, so the mindset of we'll get our way or hell will break loose definitely is not going to work. And the second part is you can have your whatever mindset you want, but there are a couple of red lines that definitely will not uh, should not be even considered, and that is using force, which is land by force. To grab land by force is definitely unthinkable because in Eritrea's case, it's fully capable of defending itself. In fact, um, history showed, especially the last few decades, it shows that not only is it capable of defending itself, but it's capable of creating a coalition with regional countries and actually be a key player in the Horn of Africa. So Eritrea is not to be undermined using force. So that's definitely unthinkable, because if one is thinking that and then also thinking long term for future generations and prosperity and economic growth and growing together, the threat of force and let alone the use of force, but even the talk about using force should be immediately eradicated from people's mind. And the other ones is to somehow think that Eritrea's independence, Eritrea's or the way Eritrea's sovereignty and territorial integrity, and since we are talking about ports, somehow if Ethiopia thinks that the ownership and the way to use Masawa and Anasa, it's not negotiable, period, because it's all about sovereignty. It's not about sitting down with Eritrea somehow and then trying to convince Eritrea to hand over what it is rightly so, what it rightly belongs to future generations of Eritreans, and that is not going to happen. So it's not a matter of negotiating, or it's not a matter of using force. Those are red lines. Because one can negotiate trade terms, one can negotiate a win-win situation like those trade agreements between other nations that we just saw. But sovereignty and territorial integrity is definitely not negotiable, because if you take that away, there is no Eritrea. And Eritreans, after proving to the world what they were willing to pay, what they were willing to do to get their sovereignty back, they will not be handing it over at a negotiating table. So, well, now that we got those two out of the way, let's talk about solutions. As I mentioned, those solutions need to be to build trust over time. And for the sake of simplicity, I'm gonna each phase. I will give it a 5 years. So first 5 years, let's talk about a dry port. Where we were earlier, I was talking about definitely Massawa and Asa, but in order to build towards that, and given the trust deficit with the low trust level of where we are between the two countries, if we are going to have sustainable peace for decades to come, it has to start by building trust. Another way of saying is Ethiopia actually has to earn that trust, especially uh, given the deteriorating trust, the overt um, campaign that it currently has against Eritrea. It will take time, and I'm not suggesting that this will actually start today, but at some point it has to start. And when it does, I think the best approach is to start doing things by coming up with a solution of dry ports. Well, what do I mean by that? I think everybody knows what dry ports are. These are ports basically that are built inland. As ships come and coastal ports, they are unloaded and loaded on trucks, and those trucks move them to a logistical facility on a dry land. And a lot of landlocked countries do that, and a lot of countries that actually have coastal ports as well, they use to dry ports to create more efficiency and so on. But in our case, it is actually designed to build trust to start from uh, to move us from where we are to where we need to be. Now, before that, the dry ports are everywhere, but good examples that we have in Africa are the Nairobi container depot, or the dry port that actually number of countries benefit from that. It serves Kenya, obviously, Uganda, Rwanda, South Sudan. So Uganda, Rwanda, South Sudan being landlocked, they benefit from that. So shipments are shipped to that container depot, you can call it, logistical hub, you can call it, but at the end of the day, it's a dry port. Rwanda has another great example, the Kigali dry port, or the Kigali logistical platform, as they call it. Definitely serves Rwanda. It serves the DRC and Burundi. So Rwanda, a landlocked country itself, manages to do that, as does Ethiopia, by the way. And another example is we have bunch of dry ports all over the west coast as well, west coast of Africa, the big ones in Nigeria and Ghana here, and it serves the other landlocked countries in their region. So this is not unheard of. And within Ethiopia, Ethiopia has already a bunch of dry ports. In fact, uh, uh, Mojo dry port being the largest one, I think it probably covers 75, 80% of what Ethiopia has been doing in terms of dry port now. But we know they have a dry port in Mojo, in Kaliti, in Samara, in the Afar region, in Dredawa, in the eastern region, Hawassa, Walaita, Jimma. So this concept of a dry port is nothing new to Ethiopia or the region. So in our case, in order to solve the problem that I was referring to, what dry port can we talk about that builds up over time so that Ethiopia can access Massawa one day, Assab one day, peacefully, legally, safely? And what I'm proposing here is a couple of dry ports. One on the border on the Assab Addis Ababa road, or on the border between Ethiopia and Eritrea in the Bure region, and one closer to the Massawa port, which in this case it could be on the Adukwala side or on the Sana'a side, on the Eritrean side, but on the border of Ethiopia and Eritrea. So what benefit does this do? Well, first and foremost, both countries, and especially Eritrea, would feel okay with Ethiopian logistical companies, well, Ethiopian trucks coming and loading and unloading from their side of the border. Or if the dry port is actually in Eritrea, all they have to do is go across that border, do what they need to do, without actually creating all this chaos and politics and threats that's been coming from Ethiopia, especially with Abiy Ahmed and the way he's been doing things, the way he's been overblowing what is simply a matter of logistics and economics into building an empire and the Ethiopian navy and complications over that. In this case, first and foremost, just use those ports, but through the facilitation of a dry port on the border areas. So if that could be done, if that could run for the first 5 years peacefully and legally, where fair win-win situation in terms of fees and other companies and countries, and when they do this, they actually have to coordinate and work together. Over 5 years, there will be some trust building. And over time, those dry ports can still be useful, even after we go to phase two, which would be giving Ethiopia normal direct access to use those ports. Even when we go there, the dry ports could be, especially of what Ethiopia expects the population to grow, economy to grow over the next 5 years. Same thing with Eritrea in their peaceful circumstances. These ports will be, these dry ports will be useful. They could be used, by the way, not only for Ethiopia and Eritrea. The one in the north could be used for eastern Sudan, because that would be closer to them. It could benefit northern Ethiopia. Not they not only function as a trust building phase, but even beyond this first 5 years, they could be used as Ethiopia's economy grows, as Eritrea's economy grows. They will be a great way to increase the capacity of those two ports anyway. But more importantly, they will take us from where we are to where we need to be. Now, if that happens, and then for in 5 years there's been no destructive politics, peaceful, normal economic growth related relationship between Eritrea and Ethiopia, it could be upgraded. Now, in phase two, a couple of things could happen, which is what we call the normal standard ones. And those are the standard port agreement. All those landlocked countries, when they access ports of their neighbors' ports, that's what they have. They have a standard port agreement. It could be negotiated, but whatever it is, there are standard international norms for doing that. And then they basically use their transit rights and the rights for them to use their trucks and trains to go to access the port and do business, because all you need is those two things. You transit to the port and you do normal business and get back. So, but this, I don't see that come. I don't see Eritrea and Ethiopia starting at this level anytime soon. We actually have to go through that phase one of a trust building, and I think the dry port approach is very doable and very realistic. Again, if this builds, if we are lucky, if the people of the region, if the people of Ethiopia and Eritrea are actually lucky enough to go to this phase two level, and then for another 5 years, between year 6 to year 10, normal things under normal circumstances could be done. Now, altogether, we will have a decade full of normal relationship. We still have to have 10 years peaceful, normal relationship with our neighbor, Ethiopia. And at this time, we are not going to say who is going to blame whom and whose fault it was and what created it and who is behind it. The bottom line is we we can't count even 5 years of normalcy with Ethiopia, maybe in the early 90s. So, but with this proposal, as we go to phase two and do normal um, port transaction between a landlocked country and a coastal country, a lot of trust building will flourish. At this time, it will not just be building up, it will be thriving, hopefully. Now, once you have 10 years of agreements like this, beyond that, anything is possible. So now we are at the end of the year 2025, 10 years, it will be the 2035. Globally, the global system and the global politics and the geopolitics of the region will evolve also. So who knows what exactly will be in 10 years. But the two countries owe it to their future generation to say, okay, at least whatever it is, whatever the future holds, we will position our people so that they can benefit from global commerce and be more competitive, because everybody else will be doing the same thing. As we move on to phase three, I think it will position Eritrea at a different level. And that is, hopefully, it will feel more secure about its sovereignty and territorial integrity. And slowly, Ethiopia has earned some of the trust back. And that will position Eritrea to do a couple of things. One, it will be able to think of leasing the port so that it could be even bigger and better and handle 5-10 times its capacity to a neutral third party company that specializes in ports. It could be a company from Italy, it could be any major company from Turkey or Saudi Arabia or what have you from the region. Whoever is able to actually handle, make the port bigger and better, 10 times better, it would be able to do that. And that in itself will create a lot of joint venture opportunities for not only for Eritrean companies and even Ethiopian companies at this level, if they earn that trust. Talking about trucking companies and companies that build ports and logistics and technology. Who knows what kind of other opportunities actually will be available in 10 years. But it will not be just for Ethiopian Eritrean companies. I think it will be for, if such facilities, with the dry ports included, will benefit South Sudan, especially the eastern part of South Sudan. Uh, ASAP will be more efficient and one of the choices for them. It will benefit Sudan in general, the northern part of Sudan. It will benefit Ethiopian companies, and so what have you. So such attraction of investment, because this will attract a lot of huge foreign investment, both countries will be able to prosper way beyond where they are now. But that could only be done if you have trust, if you have peace, if you have a win-win situation. And I might say, if there is a change of attitude in Ethiopia from this empire building, let's solve our problem by simply using force and invading what we need to do, to let's create a solution with future generations in mind. So if we are lucky enough to go to phase three, the benefits are endless. It definitely, protection of Eritrea's sovereignty will remain on top of the list. It will give not only Eritrea, but it will give Ethiopia a modern port. As its economy grows, it will be one of the major ports that it will be using, be it Massawa or Assab. It will bring a lot of foreign investment, because when you have an efficient facility and a stable situation and growing population, it attracts a lot of investment. So it will definitely bring a lot of DFI, direct foreign investment. It will, in Eritrea's case, it will continue to buffer Eritrea from Ethiopian politics, because it will be dealing, as long as the deals are done legally and through international norms, Eritrea would not have anything to fear from Ethiopia. And more importantly, as economies grow, they will create new jobs, they will create revenue to fix a lot of infrastructure, a lot of things that kept countries in the region poor. New jobs means young people don't have to choose to illegally immigrate to Europe and in America and the Middle East. They will be able to stay home. So the dividends are endless. It's very high reward. That's why it's definitely worth building things in a realistic way, phase by phase way, instead of trying to rush things and to demand something that is not doable today. Hope you agree with what I have so far, and but I look forward to your comments as we wrap up. As we wrap up, let's recap some of the benefits for each country. Let's start with Eritrea. The benefits for Eritrea include, in phase one, this is the dry port phase, it gives Eritrea maximum control and a minimum risk. This is where it will test if the relationship will be worth it over time for Eritrea. And of course, if it doesn't, I think it's not the end of the world for Eritrea. It can always, close its border with Ethiopia and think of other ways of doing things. But that would be a sad day if that is the only choice that is to be made. But the bottom line is, in phase one, definitely the very important phase of trust building, it will give Eritrea maximum control of, because without, it's not letting any Ethiopian logistical companies or otherwise into its ports, the ones that they've been threatening. It will not be doing that. This gives it maximum control, minimum risk, but at the same time, give it a chance to actually create some solution for the future. And in the second phase, this is where we have normal economic agreements port access agreements with Ethiopia. And if that works out, it will definitely give Eritrea an opportunity to earn uh, fees and from other services and from port fees without compromising any of its sovereignty, period. It will continue to do that. It will just increase its capacity to grow its economy. Not to mention, because the lack of this has forced Eritrea to spend a lot of money, a lot of its budget on defense. That will actually pay big dividends as well if that's actually if we are lucky enough to go from phase one to phase two peacefully. And then by phase three, this is where the big reward comes in. The large investments, it could be billions of dollars. It could make Eritrea uh, the strategy of its location could finally start to pay off in a big way. So that's in a nutshell benefits for Eritrea. As we move to Ethiopia, it's it wants access, but Ethiopia thinks, or leaders of Ethiopia think, they actually have to create this manufactured political drama in order to make it happen. They don't have to. If they choose this phased approach, peaceful approach, earn trust over time, they really don't have to. So, for one benefit for Ethiopia is that it will get access without creating all this drama that we have seen in the past. Um, Second, it will definitely reduce its dependency on Djibouti. Yes, I definitely do agree. Any country that has 95% of its import exports on one port should diversify, and they should have done that years ago. And Eritrea is not the only choice, by the way. From Port Sudan all the way to Mombasa, they have a bunch of choices, and they could do that, and they can still do that with or without Eritrea. But this will give them the most efficient, the most realistic, the most um, future-oriented way of reducing their dependency on Djibouti. It doesn't mean their 95% will immediately go to zero. They just have to gradually change that over time. And in this scenario, I will leave this to the experts, but it will definitely be definitely be cheaper, because a lot of the ports, Massawa for northern Ethiopia and Asab, and at the same time, are closer to Ethiopia than Djibouti is, especially when we are talking about the entire Ethiopia. Um, and I hear a lot of challenges with the Mojo dry port, as maybe something to do with Djibouti, maybe something to do with the way it was built, but uh, that's not going to be enough. They will need more dry ports, probably closer to the Eritrean ports. Maybe makes more sense. There will be a lot of other economic benefits, that same benefits that I mentioned for Eritrea, because when you have peace and prosperity, a lot of benefits are included. Now let's take a look at the benefits for both Ethiopia and Eritrea. We saw separate benefits that are actually they overlap, but here are five of them that I listed here. By using this phased approach, they could definitely both benefit. One, most important, is the step-by-step trust building, and this trust building is not only for the economy and for port usage. It actually is a matter of life and death, as far as our history shows. So that. The second part is the economic growth that I keep referring to, because ports and port access is primarily about economy and trade and what have you. So definitely they will both benefit from finding a solution. And the peace between Ethiopia and Eritrea is not about just those two countries. It affects the region. It's not only going to improve the relationship overall between the two countries, but regional possibility, regional stability, starting from Djibouti, Somalia, all the way to South Sudan. Sudan depends on stable, or one of the factors that affects them is the relationship between the two countries. The infrastructure development that could come within their own respective countries, inside Ethiopia and inside Eritrea, and the jobs that will be created, and directly related to the logistics of the ports and the dry ports and what have you are badly needed, and something that they hopefully will really make them focus. And the attracting foreign investment is not just for one country, it's for both countries, it's for the entire region. Having said all this, for Eritrea, it's not a matter of trade, commerce, port access, or economics. It's actually primarily about sovereignty. So, many proposals, many deals could be worked out. But whatever they are, I think Eritrea must avoid what we have here. First, this sovereignty corridor that Abiy Ahmed keeps talking about. It boils down to that give us a strip of land that leads all the way to the sea that we will own. This is unheard of. This is not going to be accepted in any shape or form, not only with the current government of Eritrea, but even future generations. So whatever, anything that discusses this sovereignty corridor, Eritrea is not obliged to even consider, and it should reject it the way it's been doing that. Any forced access, of course, that's another fancy way of saying invasion. It's quite capable of refuting that, but hope it doesn't have to come to that. Any other territorial claim that actually doesn't respect the Algiers Agreement, in whatever format it is, it could come many different ways. It should totally be rejected, and I don't think Ethiopia would dare bring that up again. But just in case, any in the first 10 to 15 years, as we build trust, um, uh, there may be opportunities for Eritrea to list its ports in however it sees it fit. But for the foreseeable future, any direct long-term lease to Ethiopia is, first of all, unnecessary. Djibouti doesn't give them that. Any other country doesn't give them that. All the other landlocked countries that we saw, and the way they access ports of their neighbors is not through leases. They don't need to. And especially Ethiopia and its history, that is too risky. So that should be a non-negotiable item for any lease that direct leases to Ethiopia. And then any arrangement that allows Ethiopia to build military presence on the Red Sea should be seen as a direct threat to Eritrea. It's just a matter of survival. It's a matter of reality. So I think it should be easy for Ethiopia to just get rid of these unworkable non-starters that violate not only Eritrea's stance, but international law, normalcy, what have you. All this should be scrapped. Unfortunately, this has been the list that Abiy Ahmed has been carrying for the last couple of years. But what we've been discussing here is not about today. It's about the future, and for decades to come anyway. But whatever it is, now and in the future, I don't think this should be considered. Now, as we wrap up, I hope you see some hope in what I just said. I hope you see some possibilities if we are going to actually bring common sense and peaceful way of doing things, and create some kind of a win-win situation. So as I wrap up, what I like to say is win-win is definitely possible. And I don't think this is just my opinion or the opinion of a minority of Eritreans. The majority of Eritreans, I definitely think the opinion of the leaders as well, is that now it's up to a lot of Ethiopians to actually scrap this mindset that has been really threatening Eritreans and putting us Eritreans on the defensive. If they get rid of that, many things are possible, because what we want to see is definitely a prosperous Eritrea, a prosperous Ethiopia, and a peaceful Eritrea and a peaceful Ethiopia, and so on. But in order to make that happen, starting from today, starting from now, the rhetoric has to change. The rhetoric has to say, okay, enough of the old past that has gotten us to where we are. Now we need to think fresh. We need to look forward to the future, and more importantly, to accept that Eritrea, the nation, Eritrea, the country, Eritrea, the Eritrean people are here to stay. So thank you for listening today. I appreciate it. The best way to support this channel is by actually engaging with the content, by liking, subscribing, commenting, and I read all your comments. And thank you so much for everything you do. Your constructive criticism and suggestions actually shape what I will be talking about next. So I look forward to reading all of them. But for today, thank you for your time, and I'll see you next.
عند بلا ولد ولدي الرعيان الخبر حبس اسكت الشمع كبد عدي رأي خلاني انس رأي خلاني الرأي رأي خلاني صباح طيكم تخوني